All right, I wanted to make a quick video about my lineup of lenses that I've narrowed down to or ended up with after years of shooting pictures as a hobbyist photographer. I started back in the FSLR days with a Canon AE1, then I got a 60D, then a 6D Mark II, and now I've ended up with an R5, which is absolutely my favorite camera of all the cameras I've ever had. I did briefly also have an M3. This is the lens lineup I've ended up with, and these three are EF mounts. These two are native RF mounts. EF glass is still great that I have left over from my 60D and 6D Mark II days. But anyways, this set of lenses allows me to shoot from a focal length of 24 millimeters all the way up to 400 millimeters. So that's a pretty big range, and it also allows me to get up to 640 millimeters if I put the R5 into a crop sensor, which still gives me 17.3 megapixels all the way up to 640 millimeters. So it will be a 1.6 x factor on the 400. That gets me up to 640, but for those last 240 millimeters, from 400 to 640 focal length, I'm only at 17.3 megapixels, which is still pretty usable. Anyways, between the between the range focal lengths of 24 millimeters all the way up to 200 millimeters, I do have a minimum aperture of 2.8, which is very useful. In addition, I have two prime lenses here. The reason I have 250 millimeters, I'll discuss in a second. Those go down to aperture of 1.8 and 1.4 for the 50 millimeter primes I have. Anyhow, one more thing I wanted to express is that I could actually take my focal length of 200 of aperture 2.8 all the way up to 320, but again, that's with an aperture of 2.8, but that would be at the crop of using that as a crop sensor of 1.6 factor, but I'd still get the 200 to 320 millimeters of focal length of 2.8 aperture at 17 megapixels, 17.3. Anyway, so the lenses I have here are the Canon RF 1.8 Nifty 50. Then I have the Sigma Art EF lens 1.4. You can see there. This lens is as close to optically perfect as you can get, and it was not too expensive. And then I have the Workhorse 24 to 70 2.8 EF lens, and it's the second version. And then here you obviously see the EF to the RF adapter I use for this as well as that, and the and then I have here the Canon 770 to 200. These are all classic lenses, and it's the 2 version, ultrasonic 2 version EF lens. These EF glass is outstanding, and I had this left over. I just can't justify, as a hobbyist, this pretty much suits my needs, and I can't quite justify spending more on the native RF, at least at this point. And then this I picked up I was getting into a little bit of wildlife and bird photography, especially with the autofocus on this R5, which is so insane. I was like, it's almost a crime not to have a nice telephoto lens. And so this is the Canon 100 to 400 Canon 100 to 400 lens, and doesn't get you the best aperture ratings. It's 5.6 to 8, but it does have image stabilization, and I think the image stabilization in here, this is super lightweight for such a compact lens. I mean, for such a large range of focal length. The image stabilization in any of these lenses, these three do not. But in my zoom lenses, where you really want that image stabilization, coupled with the IBIS system of the RF, gives you so many more stops of stability. Even with focal lengths, I think it's extremely helpful. And I think that's where I think choosing lenses, I think it's always a balance between cost, size, weight, all those working against you for speed and aperture. So basically aperture size. So I think it's a great balance to couple this IBIS system with image stabilization. You can really get away with smaller apertures and without having to really spend so much money on the L series lenses for focal lengths you may not use. And that brings me to my next point. I mainly shoot, you can see the focal lengths, you can probably tell which focal length I shoot at most, hence the redundancy. I have the best quality glass in 50 millimeter focal length. I mean, this is fantastic quality glass as well, but I have three redundancies of 50 millimeters. I don't know if it's because that's my shooting style. I feel like when I go too wide, I get some distortions that I don't like in my pictures. And then when I get too in the higher numbers of focal length, I feel like I struggle getting landscapes. I mean, you can still get landscapes, but I don't feel like I get enough in the picture. And I also have the weight consequence. A lot of times I take these lenses or take my camera gear hiking, and when I'm hiking, the weight really weighs on me. That's why I really like this lens, even in spite of losing aperture size and probably glass quality, it still takes fantastic pictures, but the weight is just, it's even lighter than this, which is unreal. So when I carry it on my R5, it just comes in at like 1.5 or 1.2 pounds or something like that. This is super lightweight. And that's the whole reason I have this nifty 50 here, is because I wanted, for $170, for the $170 I paid for this, the flexibility this allows me to take this. I don't even think, if I have these two coupled, I take it more often. I take it at times I wouldn't have taken my camera if I had any of these lenses attached. And so if I want to just, grab the camera and go somewhere, and I would think twice carrying something bulky around, I'll never think twice about this. And that's this combination is actually what prompted me to get rid of my compact Canon M3. I used to carry that around with the 22 millimeter pancake lens, which I liked. That lens was okay, but again, it was a little bit too wide. I get a little bit more distortion than I liked. Whereas this setup right here brings me back to the days of when I was in college shooting with my Canon film FSLR, the Canon AE1 with the I had a Zucchio Prime 50 millimeter that I would use for fawn and street photography, and it wasn't super bulky. And so once I got rid of this 6D Mark II, got this nifty 50 with this, I use this camera so much more than I used to, just because of how compact it is, how fast it focuses. I get so much, it just handles exactly like I would expect a camera to, a modern camera to. It never misses a focus, focuses on to, it's fast. Sometimes in good light conditions, I'll have even trouble telling the difference between pictures taken on this art glass and this right here. So if I can give anyone any sort of advice, I would say, and this is what I did as well, look at your old pictures, look at all your pictures and see what focal length do you end up shooting at the most? And the thing that's going to really tell you that is looking at pictures that are obviously not taken with prime lenses, pictures that have been taken with zoom lenses. And I found that I'm almost always between a focal length of 40 millimeters to 60 millimeters. Occasionally I'll be at one end if I just can't position myself, but that's the focal length that I find either most pleasing or where I find myself distance wise from my subjects. And then because of that, it's led me to really invest in a couple pieces of glass that are redundant to this, obviously, for the focal lengths that I shoot at the most and that I really enjoy. And so I wanted one piece of glass that was as close to perfect as possible in the focal length that is of my that I like the most. And I think that's 50 millimeters is the focal length I like to shoot at the most, and I actually end up shooting at the most. And so I bought this back in the day of my EF days, EF lens today. So I can't remember if I bought it when I had the 60D or if I had, or the 60 Mark II. I think I bought this when I had the 60D crop sensor, but the glass is I bought it close after it was released as well. And there was a lot of press on this about how it was really close to the Zeiss Otis lenses and that it was close to optical perfection. And I just had to experience it. And this has blown me away ever since. It is large and heavy. It does have, I believe, 11 elements of glass in there. And so it is heavy for just a fixed focal length. But I pull this out when I want to go shoot somewhere, or I know I'm going to be shooting at 50 millimeters, and I sometimes portraits, and I want just the best quality glass. And then I also wanted something for 170 bucks. I wanted something super lightweight that I can throw on this and make a super compact, lightweight package that doesn't weigh me down. And that's why I have this. And so that's why I have two 50 millimeter primes, one that's lightweight, easy to take with, and one that's close to optically perfect. And that is redundant. So I have 3 redundancies for that, but it also gets me the apertures of like 1.4 and 1.8, which are nice wide apertures. Now this 24 to 70 is probably what stays on my camera, I want to say 80, 90% of the time, just because of how optically superior this is and how flexible and versatile it is. I mean, I can compress the picture, getting a focal length of 70, and getting some good subject separation from the background. If I am taking focal lengths, if I want to get the subject or the person with a large background or take a landscape, this will do all of that. And at 2.8 with superior optical quality, image quality. And this was, I don't know if it still is, but for a long time, this was, called a prime killer, which I don't necessarily think it is a prime killer, but the quality is fantastic. Same thing goes for this. I've heard a lot of things. I kind of got this out of more curiosity. Of all my lenses, I bought everything brand new except for this lens. This is the only one I bought used. And it still works. It came in like near flawless condition, but I got to save a few $100, and I wasn't sure, but once I got it, I don't know how I lived without it. This lens is absolutely fantastic. It takes probably the best portraits. If I'm doing dedicated portrait shoot, out of all my lenses, especially if I'm outside. It's a little heavy. It's definitely cumbersome, but the way this draws light, I think, is awesome. And if you look at the Canon lineup, I think this is a super, not budget's not the right word, a super not cost effective. This is one of in my opinion, one of the most bang for buck lenses, is because the moment you try to get an aperture of continue with an aperture of 2.8 beyond 200 millimeters, you start spending some heavy duty money, especially for this optical quality. If you want this kind of quality at 2.8 millimeters, after 200, after this focal length, you spend a lot of money. And so this, I think, is a super good bang for your buck. And the pictures I take with these are phenomenal. Now, this one I purchased because I just started getting into a little bit of wildlife, bird photography. I couldn't quite justify the L version of this, which would come in at like thousands of dollars, whereas this came in at like $600 or $700 or $800. And it's lightweight. I liked how lightweight it was. And I use this lens the least. Absolutely. It's definitely a fun lens to use. I've even taken some good pictures, but there are definitely limitations in terms of not image quality. Image quality I have no gripes about. There's absolutely limitations in terms of the aperture size. At 5.6 to 8, it's still good. It's still okay, but you really got to be cognizant of the lighting and the speed. And usually when I'm shooting wildlife, I do find that there's some limitation there. But the reach is amazing, especially when I use it with the crop. If I crop this to 1.6 and then I use it with this, I can get all the way to 600. So to shoot at like 5.6 or 8 aperture all the way to 600 for $700 or $800 with excellent image quality, I think is an awesome bargain. Not to mention, I mean, it's always a balance. It's about how to get as much light in. And as long as the lighting conditions are good, you're using the IBIS in conjunction with the, what's it called? The image stabilization on the lens. So the IBIS and the lens are working in conjunction. You can get away with the less light let in. And so I actually tested out the R6 before I bought the R5. And the reason I ended up going with the R5 is because of the 45 megapixel sensor. Not only that, I'll probably just make a second video on this, is there's so much technology put in with the IBIS and the image stabilization that works in conjunction, and that the low light performance has gotten so much better since the days of like the 60D or a crop sensor. This is a full size sensor, and 6D Mark II. So you can get away with hand holding stuff that I wasn't able to get away with before the IBIS system. And so that did worry me about the 45 megapixel sensor, that it doesn't let as much light in as, the sensor's not as sensitive to low light as this R6 or the R6 Mark II. However, there are ways to get around it. One is to get lenses with larger apertures that allow larger apertures, and that's what I did, or that's what I had done in the past for at least the bulk of my apertures, 24 to 200. And then for I don't shoot beyond 200 that often. So, and when I do, I'm almost always in perfect light conditions. I mean, I'm only shooting wildlife when the weather is nice. It's, sunny, and I'm outside. So I have ambient sunlight. So I can get away with the 5.6 to 8. I'm usually not taking this out at night ever or shooting in low light conditions. It's more of like I said, I'm a hobbyist, a hobby shooter. So I could get around that. Anyways, I hope this helps for anyone putting lenses together or camera gear together. EF, don't overlook the EF lenses, especially if you're a hobbyist. If this stuff is used to pay bills and this is your primary job, it's probably makes a lot more sense to invest in the native glass or native mount, which is the RF. But if you're just a hobbyist and you're doing this for fun, there's nothing wrong with getting the native glass as well, but absolutely don't discount the EF glasses. That's fantastic glass that's been around for a long time, and it still works. And with this mount, with the adapter, it works flawlessly with the mount system. And another thing is this doesn't have, these two do not have the image stabilization systems internal to the lens. And I've found that the image stabilization, this is almost as if this has image stabilization in the lens, whereas this in conjunction with these is just phenomenal. And it still adds maybe a stop or two, maybe more to these. I think I read somewhere online that adds up to 5 stops of, stabilization with the IBIS system, and up to 8 if you have it in both systems. I don't know if I could say it's quite 5, but it's definitely much better than without. Takes a lot of shakeout, and plus these are lower focal lengths, like 24 and 50, where I'm not as dependent on image stabilization as I would be out at like 200 or 400 for that matter, where it's really handy to have both image stabilization in the lens as well as the camera. They work fantastic in conjunction. So I hope this video is helpful, and please let me know in the comments if you want me to go elaborate on any one of these lenses or any questions you may have. Thank you.